Hello and a very warm welcome to everybody who's been able to join us at this webinar today. We're looking at the future of education and how ambition loops can help transform the teaching profession. We are a part of the Centre for Educational Research and Innovation, CERI, and our actual project is called New Professionalism and the Future of Teaching. We're really looking to anticipate and open up thinking about how we might do things differently and share good ideas of what are working that we know about already. We are joined by a wonderful panel here today. They'll be introduced to you shortly. I won't do that now, but I just want to give you a little bit of background on the actual projects and work and the conceptual parts that have led us to this idea of ambition loops that we're going to discuss with you. New professionalism. Why new? We argue we've looked at different sectors. We've looked at what we think where teaching can learn and improve, but we also have a very strong argument and make the case that teaching can lead the way in a collaborative, connected professionalism. The relational is so important in all we do now. Connectivity is just exponentially increasing around us in our lives, in all aspects of our lives, and it's a survival in the professional world, really. So this is what we mean by new professionalism, and we think that teachers are really well positioned to do this and to lead the way to teach others how to do this well. We also looked about in recognizing that there's a lot of ideas around collaboration, but that this is sometimes quite a hard endeavor. So you need certain aspects in place. You need approaches, clarity, that it all means something to everybody involved. We're actually going to use, it's going to be useful for us in our work. So all these points are in a research body of research that we've been documenting and working on the last couple of years. The most recent part of this is this idea of ambition loops. And this is what Jason McGrath, who's moderating for us today, has been working on to publish this week. It will be available on our website tomorrow. You can see find the website connection in the chat. And the working paper is called "What Systematic Connections Should We Have Around Schools to Support the Work of Teachers?" And it looks at global lessons and the potential of these ambition loops. So let's have a look at what we mean by ambition loops. In essence, it's a series of clear statements, we hope, which give us access to research of how we can better connect teachers to their communities and to other professionals around them. So this diagram that you can see has the blue part with the teachers in the center and the immediate community of families and students around them. We also have then the green section of the diagram, which is showing professionals. These are school teachers, so it's professionals in other areas of the education system, so in early childhood, right the way up to higher education, and of course, the teacher educators being a really important part of this. And then we also think about going outside of education sector to different areas such as professionals in health, in welfare, culture, educational technology, and we're going to be discussing parts of this here today with the panel. Just to give you a flavour of what these ambition loops could look like, we have, for the school community, for example, we were trying to open minds and think more in a more ambitious way about what we could do. What if? So what if we could create space to think collectively about the future and develop new ideas? What if we unlock student voice and involvement in decision making, for example, within the community? If we look for connecting with professionals in the education sector overall, what if we value and support interdisciplinary learning and working as a core part of professionalism? Looking to other sectors, what if we see teachers as pedagogical innovators? And within each of these parts, there's going to be a series of clear statements of ambition for the different groups involved in collectively realizing and working towards these ambitions. So this is what we're trying to achieve here. I think I will now pass over to Jason, who will introduce the panel today, and I really hope you have a great discussion. One last point, feel free, it's participatory, feel free to include your questions in the chat, and we'll pick up as many as we can to share with the panel. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Claire. And we have a panel of 3 people today who I'll introduce individually. But to start with, we're going to look at the school community level of the diagram that Claire has worked us through. And I'll just show you 2 examples of ambition loops that try to reflect what we found by looking for next practice in the research. So the first one is an example where teachers focus on exercising professional autonomy to develop teaching and learning that is the most relevant and meaningful to their students. And each of these statements has some research behind them. And one that we'll hear a lot more about today, because it's based on the work of Professor Debbie Pusher, is teachers and schools developing a pedagogy of walking alongside families by valuing the unique knowledge that families hold about their child. So I'd like to introduce our first panelist, Professor Debbie Pusher, who's a full professor at the Department of Curriculum Studies at the University of Saskatchewan in Canada. Debbie's research includes narrative inquiries into parent engagement and leadership, a curriculum of parents and parent knowledge. She's currently engaged in analysing and interpreting research from her study of systematic parent engagement, situated in an elementary school and a high school. Debbie makes central an underrepresented conversation about the positioning of parents in relation to the school landscapes, including the positioning of Indigenous parents and families, newcomer parents and families, families living in the context of poverty, and families with non-dominant family forms. It's a real pleasure to introduce Professor Pusher. Thank you, Debbie. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome, Jason. Thank you, Claire, for the opportunity to be here with you today. It's just such an exciting time to look at changes, possibilities with new teacher professionalism in relation to the home connection to schools, the community connection to schools. So just want to mention, first of all, where are we now? And I think we're living in a time where our schools are what Michael Lawson called school-centric. Societal expectations, the education of teachers have created a situation where schools claim the ground, right? They say we are the people in charge of education. And they develop the curriculum, they implement that curriculum, they implement and enact all of the policies and practices around that. And what that creates is that sense of expert knowing, of teachers being the experts of teaching, learning, development, and so on, and parents being held on the outside, right? Bring your kids to school, drop them and go, we're good with that. So what's the preferred future that I imagine and that I'd like to see? And that's one where we move to family-centric schools instead. So what do I mean by that? In family-centric imaginings of school, we know that parents, family members, community members are all also educators of children and promoters, knowledge holders with teaching and learning. And so in that sense, if we think about it, kids are only in school 20% of the time. You do the math on that, they're only in school 20%. They're out of school, they're learning and living in other places 80% of the time. So think about how much of their education takes place in these other times, these other places. And how much knowledge and expertise then parents, families, community members have about teaching and learning. And so in that instance, what we're doing is we're opening up our schools and we're honoring all of that expertise, all of that other learning that happens. When we do that, I think we also really address issues of equity. Families are the people, communities are the people who best know the culture, the identity, the language of their children. And so we begin to build more equitable places of learning. So what would the ambition be then in order to shift from school-centric to family-centric schools? And that would be I think, to help teachers develop a philosophy and a pedagogy in which they walk alongside parents and families. And what would that take? So I'm using an old term that Polanyi used, Michael Polanyi, about dwelling in. And I think what would be so key is to have our teachers learn to dwell with families, to dwell in community, to really know the children, the families, the parents with whom they work. So how might that look? That might mean teachers leaving the landscape of their schools, going out into community, doing community walks, learning what exists in the community, the resources, the assets, the people, the possibilities. It might mean doing home visits with families, sitting with them in their own homes, learning their home culture. What are their hopes and dreams for their children? What are the kinds of things they do with their kids when they're not in school? What are their values and beliefs? It might mean also bringing families onto the school landscape in new ways. So it's very typical, I think, across the world for us to host in schools a Meet the Teacher night at the beginning of the year. So what if we turn that on its head? What if it's not a Meet the Teacher night, but instead it's a Meet the Family night? And the purpose is for teachers to know families, to learn, again, things like their hopes and dreams, to learn about their culture and identity, and then to use that knowledge in our curriculum making. What if instead of teachers sharing school learning with families, we began to do things like create home and school learning albums, or having home and school conferences where parents share all of the learning that's happening in their homes and places, and then teachers add to that. So we're honoring that knowledge and expertise. So that dwelling in means that we recognize that parents are holders of knowledge and that teachers too are holders of knowledge. And the walking alongside is when we bring those ways of knowing together. We have a larger, more composite sense of how, when, where, what children are learning. And we co-construct then teaching and learning together. So maybe, Jason, I'll leave it at that for now, and I look forward to more conversation. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Debbie, for getting us started and certainly opening up our thinking around how things could look differently. So we're going to move on now to look at the education sector. I'd like to share just a couple of ambition loops from the education sector that's in our paper. The first looks at the education sector more broadly, covering all those areas that Claire mentioned, and it's simply the idea that teachers are able to network with other professionals within the education community, but to support a child-focused approach to teaching and learning, or learning and teaching. And we actually say through the whole aspect of formal schooling and even beyond that. And one of the things about the Ambition Loops tool that we've developed is we not only look at the level of education sector, but we do go down into specific sectors. So just sharing a very specific example related to higher education. And what if education policymakers this time value and promote the potential for schools to establish long-term relationships with universities in their local context, and establish this idea of the school and the university as anchor institutions within a community. And to get us started thinking about how we might reframe our partnerships at the educational sector level, it's my pleasure to introduce Professor John Fischetti, who is the Pro-Vice Chancellor of the College of Human and Social Futures at the University of Newcastle in Australia. The college has taken on a challenge to promote equity-minded excellence throughout the social sciences and creative disciplines. And as we negotiate the evolving machine-driven world, John's goal is to revise the future of humanity. John's work, which is extensive, demonstrates commitment to working with schools and the community to provide quality teaching and learning for all students. It's a pleasure to introduce John and hand the floor to him. Thank you.
Sorry, team, we've coming to you live at nearly midnight here in Australia. Just a little glitch in getting the sound to work. Good evening, good day, good morning, good afternoon. It's great to be with you. Jason, thanks for that kind introduction. And I appreciate the opportunity to be with you today. What I'd like to do in just a few short minutes is give you the context behind what Jason was just speaking to. And that is more the philosophical aspect of where our work and the paper section that I had the privilege to be part of is in. I'd like to start by acknowledging that this evening I'm on the land of the Awabakal people here in eastern New South Wales, Australia, and I want to pay my respects to the First Nations people who have provided us 60,000 years of legacy in which to have this conversation. And we stand on their shoulders and the shoulders of all First Nations people in the world. So what are we partnering for, Jason, is my context. What are we doing with this? Partnering makes sense, but what are we doing? And I think I'd like to quote Tim Cook around the notion of we're leading with our values. And I think that's the opportunity we have, particularly in whatever this normal is we're calling 2023 and beyond. In my region of eastern New South Wales, the growth areas for the future involve tremendous increase in capacity and health, supporting defense, pros and cons of that, of course, tourism and event and hospitality, our transition from a coal economy, the world's largest coal shipping port is right here, as you know, Jason, and we're transitioning to hydrogen right before our very eyes, and education, and that's education for everyone, early childhood all the way through lifelong learning. And in that growth, my worry is that the quintessential issue of our time, and I'll project that around the planet today to all the continents participating, is undereducation. That's the undereducation of all of us on this conference call, as well as those in schools and any other form of education from formal to informal. And that our biggest risk that we have, under which most of the problems of the world exist, is actually our inability to continue to grow and to learn while we try to solve the big problems of our times. And around here, because we're transitioning from a mining economy, it's the mind versus the mind that we are really embedded in. I think this aligns with the notion that we can't do this alone. We've got a partner. And as you said, schools and universities is a heart of a community and a vibrant intellectual hub. With the automation of everything from autonomous cars to checkers at the supermarket you might shop at, those who are underprepared for the future will be left out of the growth that we have coming. And by doing so, we're creating extra privilege for those already privileged and defeating the purpose, particularly of government-funded education for those that are less privileged. And that will backfire on us, and this next generation will be shut out of the growth and opportunity. And I'm not sure we're ready. And maybe the examples OECD is providing in this paper and in the other work that you do will be able to do so. One of the realities is the human way we think is based on linear aspects of growth and thinking. And in 1858, people thought the telegraph as it came in was going to be too fast for us to process information. In Australia, it would take us a long time to know that we had a king instead of a queen, perhaps, and some other aspects. And right now, you know that we probably have gotten 7 tweets and 5 Instagram posts and a bunch of other news that was frivolous right since we started chatting. My metaphor for this is the notion between the dumb phone and the smartphone. And the dumb phone is really a didactic approach, mostly transactive. That transaction that we take care of is I want to call Claire and I say, hi, Claire, it's John. How are you? What's for lunch? Let's get together. And we say goodbye. And in the smartphone world that we're in, the pedagogy is much more dynamic. It's my bank. It's my personal assistant. It's my diary. It's the way I see my grandbaby. It's the way I do business. And the pedagogies of most of our relationships with students at universities and schools still looks like a dumb phone in a smartphone world. And to prove the point, the top 10 passwords this year around the world, we won't have time for a quiz on this, still happen to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You might get clever and add 7, 8, 9. Some people add the 0, and few people got clever and put QWERTY. So we're operating as an undereducated world, and 200 of our participants are just changing their password right now. So the risk is undereducation. We ourselves are undereducated for the kind of problem solving we need to make this a fantastic human experience on this small planet. Last year in Australia, Apple, ANZ, which is basically Apple company in Australia and New Zealand, had this job advertisement for a job where they said you might have a degree. We're not sure. It doesn't necessarily matter. And the number one qualification was that their applicants know people, that they see around corners and approach problems flexibly. I'm not sure about you, if you were going to reapply for your job, what evidence you would show that you know people and you can see around corners. They didn't ask for a transcript, what your grade point average was, what your SAT scores, or whatever country you come from, what your exit exams score were. They want to know these things. Are we preparing ourselves for what we really need? And will partnerships help us? Schools in particular can control pedagogy, technology, space, staffing, engagement, support, and professional learning. Are principals equipped in these areas to understand these balls in the air that are so profoundly crucial? You can't let any of them drop, and they're all coming at you all the time. And that juggling act itself is a skill set that only very few have actually been able to do and to be successful. So as we go back to normal, and I don't know what it was that we're trying to get back to, I propose we go forward to a different kind of normal, which uses what we know about teaching and learning. And besides that, we've gotten to see during a pandemic a lot of orange kitty cats, at least in Australia. That was one of the number 1 or 2 searches. And this is the one animal that I found that can see around corners. So this kitty cat has the job at Apple. Isaac Newton got full professor at Cambridge, working from home during the plague in the last phase of it. And somehow we really haven't necessarily valued what the flexibility is that we also learned. And that full professorship came after 2 years. With 6 months working from home, he made a fellow, and 2 years later became professor from the ideas on gravity and mathematics that he really sat around an apple tree and figured out. So what did we learn about honoring flexibility and accepting change and thriving ambiguity and practicing self-regulation and providing the common good, promoting it? Have we built those in to our notions of partnership at the particularly school and university levels? Because we still perpetuate that for too long, schools and universities are places students go to watch their teachers work. I think Debbie just said that well just a few minutes ago. We're holding on to the ways of teaching, learning, and assessment we know, rather than evolving the ways of doing education that are future focused, and assessment's still holding us back in most conservatively led countries in the world. We've got testing centers instead of learning centers, and preparing learners. We're really actually supposed to be preparing learners for their future, not our past. And I think that context is really crucial. Now, in the last minute or so, what I want to share is most people say, but we don't have time for more learning. We're already swamped. It's already too busy. 9 hours a day in Australia now, everyone over 12 years old is staring at a screen. 3 hours of that in social media. My proposal is that we have that time in that 3 hours. Most of that is filler time. Most of the Australian reality is in these sites where you can go. Most of them actually run by the number 1 educator in the world today. And I'm not sure we've realized we've given over our own education, since most of the world gets their news only from their social media sites. Professor Zuckerberg is actually our number 1 educator, the number 1 teacher of our own parents, if they're still living, and our children, and now ourselves. Could we get some of the 3 hours a day we're given to Zuckerberg back for real meaningful partnership learning? And in so, change the role of the learner, the teacher, and assessment so we can get smarter instead of dumber. The real issue, and most of what we want to focus on, is how we move from passive to active and more depth than breadth. We're trying to get in this upper right quadrant of depth and of understanding and active learning, and much more performance-based and authentic kinds of assessment. And most of the work members of this conference will do would be around that, I propose, trying to change the role of the teacher, the learner, and assessment. Partnerships really should add up to more than 2. And I think that's the section of the paper that you'll see tomorrow that Claire was mentioning, that you'll get to see our little section of the paper. It involves continuous education and different kinds of teaching and learning that prioritize relevance, which is life ready, grows the talent from the people we have, not the people we wish we had, and promotes the common good and contributes to equity. Those points are really important that we take on board. Stop wishing for the team you don't have, play with the one you got. Otherwise, we won't be able to get any job in the near future because we won't be able to see around corners or know people. And we've also got to find a way to find joy and privilege as we lean and learn and lead together. That's my beautiful grandbaby mirroring a great white shark. And she brings joy, but how come it is after about 3 years old, we steal it away from our kids? And for some reason, most everybody's feeling a little under pressure rather than celebrating the chance we have to be great leaders in this amazing dynamic time in human history. So Jason, that's a different approach to get to the background behind the section in the paper. Thanks for having me here tonight, or today, or this morning.
Thanks, John. That's great. And I'm still thinking about seeing around corners. So that's a great thing to think about. And thank you to all the questions. We're taking note of these. There's some nice themes emerging for us to challenge the panel with. After we hear from our third panelist, who's going to open up our conversation around the partnerships with professionals in the broader societal sector. Two examples here. The first one is aimed at policymakers, if they could support collaboration between teachers and experts in broader societal sectors that support career specialisation opportunities for teachers. And again, just sharing that we actually have some specific statements related to certain areas, including EdTech, and that will lead nicely into introducing our third panellist, Professor Tony Hall, who's Personal Professor of Education at the School of Education and Director of Educational Design Research, Designing Futures at the University of Galway in Ireland. Tony's also the General Editor of Ireland's principal education research journal, Irish Educational Studies. His research interests focus on educational design research, innovation, and technology in education, and exploring the potential of design-based research as a change-driven, solution-orientated research methodology in different educational contexts and settings. Tony's undertaken educational design research across diverse educational contexts and settings, including primary, post-primary classrooms, museums, and science centres. His research has explored the potential of a range of technologies in education. It's great to have you here today, Tony, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so very much, Jason. And lovely to be here with you all today, or this morning, as John said, or this evening. It's wonderful to have so many colleagues and also our participants in the call as well. And lovely to meet you, Debbie, and John and Claire as well today. So I'll try to add to what my learned colleagues and friends have said so eloquently about education. I was really taken with the family-centric approach you outlined, Debbie, and also how you spoke to the future of education, John, as well. So I'll try and add to some ideas there for our discussion as well. And I suppose looking at it as an educational designer, looking at the issue of the future of education and teaching, I'm very taken with your paper, Jason, on ambition loops. And I think they give us a very good framework for looking at how we can try to change education positively for teachers, for students, as Debbie said, critically for families and parents as well. And I think one of the things we always have to bear in mind is the complexity of educational systems and what our priorities are and who the key stakeholders are, of course, as well. And I'm thinking of the film Back to the Future at the moment as well. And there's I remember seeing a meme and it said, don't go back to 2020, whatever you do. But not to take us back too much to the pandemic, but I suppose we have come out of a period of time where, you know, according to the UN and the OECD's own data as well, nearly 1.6 billion learners in more than 190 countries have had their education disrupted or impeded in some way or changed significantly. And I think we all saw the benefits of technology, particularly while we were isolating and while we were unable to attend at school and in university. And again, I think it's quite remarkable the period we're living in, because we're learning from this and the learning loss that has arisen because of the pandemic as well, that we're still working through our understanding and our learnings around what has impacted education across the globe in the last number of years. And I think it's remarkable that the statistic that I just outlined is actually more than the number of people that were on the planet when we last had such a pandemic in 1918. So that just gives some sense of the scale of the impact of COVID-19 on education. But coming through that, I think, and looking back at the past, if we go a little bit further back as well, and I can just think of the Irish context, if I may talk about Ireland for a moment, We had a very important development in our educational history in 1966. The Minister for Education in Ireland at the time, Don O'Malley, rather than actually doing the normal thing for ministers at the time, which was just to speak to his government colleagues, he went straight to the media and he announced that every child in Ireland would have free secondary education. This was an absolutely seismic, momentous development in Ireland at the time, and it absolutely changed the possibilities for young people. And at a time in our country when, even though we were 50 years independent at the time in 1966, tens of thousands of kids were not able to go on from primary school to second level education and from there to third level. And it has absolutely transformed this country. But one of the things I think is really important to note about that development, even though it was a very important and momentous development in Ireland, was they understood at the time that you can't address educational access and equality in educational access without looking at wider social inequality and deprivation and privation. And some of the things they did very nobly at the time to try to address and improve education generally, not just providing free access. They also introduced a bus scheme, a free school transport scheme at the time, to bring children from regional areas of Ireland to the centres where they could go to school. And also they introduced the first time free books. And of course, at the moment, we have a debate in Ireland about free school meals. And I think it's critically important that we always remember that this is a priority for us, whether at the community, school level, or at the societal level, that educational disadvantage must be tackled in its broadest sense, not just in school, as we can do, but also and through our policy and education, but has to be addressed more fundamentally in the society. Another example, I think, from the past, which gives us a model for the future, is the Reggio Emilia approach, as we'll probably all well know, in Italy, which after World War II, where the community, the society, and the educationists and the families in that part of Italy, they wanted a different type of education for their children. And so they've developed this wonderful model of education where they focus on all the talents of the child. Comes back to what John was outlining as well, and Debbie, around we need to engage more with families and understanding where families come from, and using that as a premise for our curriculum design. And the child then is, I think, forgive my Italian, the protegazione, where the child is the protagonist in their learning. They are their voice is important, and John outlined that in his slides as well. And I think a really nice idea, a powerful idea from Reggio as well, is they call the learning environment the third teacher. So how important it is that we invest infrastructurally, physically, in school buildings that are inspirational, that are beautiful, that allowed for different types of learning, different configurations of learning, whether that be learning on our own, whether that be learning in groups from others as well. And I think, you know, when we look at the one of the things I would love in the future, again, I'm addressing that question, the future of education as well, is I'd like education, and there's so much of this going on already, and I'd like to just, if I may, praise teachers in my own country and internationally for what they do every day in educating the next generation and educating all of us and families and supporting our society. But one of the things we might develop further is teacher research in schools, where that's one of the things for the future I think that we should try to focus is on research-based change in schools. And again, this is where I think, speaking from my own discipline, educational design can be so powerful, because it can help us to strand together, to draw together the theories that are very powerful of learning, be they from Vygotsky or Darling Hammond or Fisher, etc., from the different educationists, but also what works practically. So I think critically we need to try to promote educational research more at scale in schools. This, I think, is really important in giving us the best guide forward. And if I may, I can mention a project we're involved with in Ireland, which has been developed by our teaching council and a number of our institutions here, including my own university, University of Galway, called the Teachers Research Exchange, TREX. Hopefully not a dinosaur, but we do use the dinosaur logo. And the whole idea is teachers, it's kind of like a Facebook for teachers to do research. They can connect with other teachers doing research, they can share ideas, and they can connect also with people who are professional researchers, such as academics and others, policymakers and that as well. So I think for the future, I'd like to see us taking forward the educational project with a very strong research base, where we really, hopefully at last, bridge that gap between the powerful theories and the inspiring practices of education. So thank you very much, folks, and I'll finish for the moment there.
That's really great. Thank you to all of the panel and to Jason for the lovely introductions. I think you won't be surprised to learn that this has got people thinking. We've had quite a lively exchange within the chat. Many ideas are coming up, including on some of the technicalities of the ambition loops, which is quite interesting for us as a team that we can look into afterwards. But maybe if you don't mind me starting in order of the presentation. So with Debbie, there's a few questions that have come up in your area, Debbie. One of the points is about how to maintain these connections beyond schooling. I think there was a particular question. There were a couple in this area, but there was a particular one from an early childhood educator who said these are actually strengths at the moment. We do this well, but as the child goes through the system, we start to lose this. So do you have any thoughts around that for us? Thank you.
Thanks so much for your question, Claire, and to those of you who've put comments in the chat. I can't keep up with it. It's going so fast, but it's so exciting to read the comments there. You know, it comes back to how we educate teachers, and what I think we teach them is important, right? So we talk about professionalism, we talk about professional boundaries, we talk about professional standards. But when we do that, we often, within those walls, say it's being an expert, it's having knowledge of curriculum, of assessment, of instructional strategies. What if we redefine what it means to be a professional, and we say that to be a professional is to be in relationship with your students, in relationship with their families, in relationship with the communities in which they reside. When we say who we are going to be, who we want to be is different, then I think we also have the opportunity to shift what gets prioritized in school, where time goes, right? So instead of making certain things the priority, instead of having accountability agendas, what if we have relationship agendas? And I think then what will shift in schools will shift all the way through. Why is it currently happening in early childhood? Because we say it's important. Why is it not happening in secondary schools? Because we don't privilege it. We don't say it's important there. We say curriculum is important. So defining what is it we want from our system, what is it we want from our teachers in terms of teacher identity and teacher role, I think is critical to that kind of a shift. So that would probably be my first response to that, Claire.
Claire, I really liked your response. Debbie, I really liked your response to Claire's question. And Tony gave a great example of Reggio Emilia in his sharing a little while ago. I wanted to propose that an additional model that some of our folks around the world might not have gotten into, that I know, Jason, you were integral in helping to start here in Australia, was the big picture approach for secondary. And Debbie, you may be familiar with big picture, but started about 30 years ago. It really twists upside down the way we do secondary school. So happy to talk about that more. But just as Reggio Emilia is an amazing early childhood example, big picture has actually transformed the way young people are treating school. And by the way, big picture schools in Australia have not lost one teacher in the last 3 years due to working conditions or struggles through the pandemic. In fact, they have a waiting list for people to come on board. And therefore, it's the complete opposite of every other sector in Australia right now, which has lost massive thousands of teachers due to the overwork and the stresses that have come by society's upheaval. So it's another great example. I appreciated what you just shared, Debbie.
Thanks, John. And I think too, you know, we have a lot of research that's been done on home visits, especially through the Parent-Teacher Home Visit Project in the United States. And when teachers have relationships with families and with students, they stay in the profession longer. There's less stress and burnout. They like their jobs more. Those are proven research facts. And so I think you're so right. Like when you're saying that in these big picture schools, people aren't leaving. We don't leave when we find joy in our work. We don't leave when we're part of a community that we know cares about us, right? And that we show care in return. So that human element again becomes so critical, I think, John.
If we could continue on that theme, John, and really picking up some of the questions in the chat, there's a bit of a paradox here that a lot of teachers are suffering perhaps burnout, lack of motivation, and a lot of stress, certainly. And the question is really is how can we reframe anything when people are struggling with the current approach? So I'd be interested in seeing how you think we can inject optimism at a time when there is such stress, and perhaps if other panels might come in. And one of the interesting things was in the chat that people also mentioned that parents themselves or families themselves are actually time poor. So how do we overcome that for them as well? But if John, if you'd like to start, and then Tony and Debbie, if you wanted to join in, feel free.
Yeah, it's a complex question for a session on its own, I realize, but for working people of the world, this is a very difficult time. The economy of the world is so fraught with high prices and opportunities that are holding people back, mostly related to a poor education the government has provided them, limiting their potential. But in that sense, those families are the most worrisome to me because they have very limited options. I don't believe that we're time poor. I think it's how we choose to use our time. Almost everybody on the planet is wasting a little bit of time on doing some things that are distracting, that in the past might have been reading a book. And that would help us grow a little bit better. So we could take some of that time back, but that's a privileged point of view, I realize. One of the real issues is the partnership approach that I think is tipped by the paper, because universities are still operating a little bit in a vacuum from their partners. For example, we prepare teachers in many respects not using the current practices that are used in schools. We teach classroom management methods that don't take into consideration the conditions many young people are feeling when they come on a morning to school. The free breakfast idea that Tony was talking about is being abandoned in many places because of budget cuts. And even then, quite often, it's not nutritionally sound anyway. Yet we're building stadiums and prioritizing all the bush aspects of society where it seems to be we're back to business as usual. The real issue to me is the design of schools, particularly secondary schools, is holding us back. And that means we're very, very curriculum focused, assessment focused, test focused, and not student focused. And flipping that to the passions of young people and what they want to study allows us to accomplish the curriculum almost cattywampus, upside down and backwards and all however it works, but trusting that the learning process of young adults can focus on them, not on finishing to chapter 23. And in doing so, go deeper instead of wider and actually get students prepared for their future. So that's a bunch of thoughts, but there's a whole depth to your good question.
I remember reading a commentary by Nell Noddings, probably quite a long time ago, maybe as far back as 2009. And she talked about the difference between accountability and responsibility. And I think we're so accountability driven in society and in our schools. And so accountability causes us to look upward. Are we meeting the expectations of those above us? But when we shift to that ethic of care that she wrote about, and we focus on responsibility, we're able to respond to those in our care. So we're looking to those around us, to those in our circle, rather than looking up. So I wonder, how do we reclaim a sense of being responsible to those we live and work with, rather than accountable to those who set standards above us?
I think definitely to reframe, as Debbie has outlined, that from that accountability discourse to responsibility, I think is a very powerful idea. And as John said, it's also prioritizing teaching at the moment. I think, as John outlined, we have hyperinflation nearly, and we have cost of living is much increased in the last number of years. But if you look at the history of education as well, and the work that historically teacher unions, for example, would have done around the terms and conditions and paying conditions of teachers, that had a marked impact on the organization of the concept of a profession of teaching. And I think that's really important, that we valorize and protect teaching, and that teachers, again, it's one of the most important jobs. We might argue it's the most important job, but it's certainly one of the most important jobs in society and in our world. So we have to, given the economics, dire economic situation more generally, we have to ensure the teachers are appropriately and favorably remunerated, and their conditions of work are decent. And again, I think of the casualization, short-term contracts and that as well, which doesn't help in terms of someone's engagement in the concept of a profession. And equally then, where we can emphasize, as John outlined, those kind of innovative programs where there is engagement and there isn't attrition of teachers, because they believe in what they're doing and they enjoy their work as well. Because that's why any of us have become educationists or teachers, is our, as Debbie said, that responsibility to our learners and to the society at large, to improve society, and that concept of education as a public good. And I think the day that we don't protect and we don't promote education in that way is a very, very problematic moment.
Thanks to you all. I mean, just as an aside, we were looking into reviews many years ago in the OECD in various countries and looking at accountability. And already this concept is very Anglo, and the word that people were familiar with, or it made sense to them and was actually intuitive and all that was worthwhile thinking about, was responsibility. So I think we need to be aware that maybe the discourse is slightly different in different countries, and that might not be such a big focus. But thank you for these ideas and the experiences in that. Coming back to one of the ambition loops in particular was talking about what if we value the schools as a physical place for learning, and that's come through in sort of in a way of surviving in an over digitalized world. And there are some comments about AI and AI to AI teaching and AI to teacher, teacher to AI, blah, 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 all different combinations. But really, how could we then reclaim, what are the opportunities around learning from our physical surroundings in the school and its community? Do you have some further thoughts on that you would like to share? Maybe Tony, you're nodding at me prominently in the screen, so I'll let you have first pass.
Thanks, Claire. Certainly, yeah, I think the school as a locale, as a physical locale, is so important. We saw that in the pandemic when young people were disconnected from their friends and that community of learners and community of friends that they have in school, and when we couldn't go back onto our campuses for all sorts of reasons across the globe. That was a very difficult time for everybody, and particularly for young people. And as a university teacher educator now, and as a university educator, some of the students that are in our university and many around the world have missed a number of years of their education. So that learning loss is quite significant at the moment. But I do think that the school as a physical environment is very important, and that was really highlighted particularly during the pandemic. But I do think there are lots of things we can do. For example, now you see schools that have been built co-located with, for example, forest schools. So I think what we do is we need to open out the school as well. It needs to be an expansive rather than a closed environment, and that's very critical. And I think that invites people in as well. And it means that the school is more physically connected into its community and into society as well. Another area that I think we should be focusing on more for the future as well is the whole space of development education, which is a whole philosophy and approach to education, which puts, again, it comes back to the ideas of Debbie there and John as well around reframing the way we look at education is so important. But what it does is it gets us to focus on social justice issues. It gets us to focus on climate change, because irrespective of where we are in the world, we're all seeing the impacts of this now collectively, globally. So this is a shared challenge for us. And I think, that is a way we should be looking at reframing the curriculum, because you can use English literature, PE, physics, maths, history, geography, home economics, whatever subject you're looking at, you can, through a development education lens, you can start to explore issues around the global south and the the climate change and social justice and inclusion as well, as I was saying. So I think that's another aspect that is important. And again, Reggio gives us that great quote of the learning space being the third teacher. That's how important the physical environment of learning is. And as someone who's a kind of a bit of a interested in lots of areas of education and taught a number of subjects as well as a teacher and as a former physical education teacher, I would dearly love to see schools much more focused on, as the Reggio say, the 100 languages, Howard Gardner's concept of multiple intelligences. We all have many talents, we all have many abilities, and always education should focus on the holistic development of the young person or the student. And I think the learning environment should encourage us to explore all our talents and our capabilities as learners.
Can I jump in on that one too? Here's something that I spend a lot of time thinking about. You know, as I said earlier, kids are in school about 20% of the time. That means our school buildings are open about 20% of the time. So we have these public facilities typically that have been, millions of dollars have been spent to build them, and they're closed 80% of the time. And they're only open to kids, to students who are registered there. So what if we began to imagine, in terms of that physical locale of the school, that it was open, let's just be extravagant and say 24/7, and that the library was a family library, and that as a parent, I could have a family library card to that library, and that we could put toddler books and adult books into our school library, that we had Sunday library time, that we used the kitchen for wonderful opportunities to cross culture with strategies like Cooking for Cohesion. There was a school in our north here in Saskatchewan, an Indigenous community in the north, and they had families use their kitchens for their Christmas dinner, the gym to play, the library to have games during that time, right? So we have a resource that is so underutilized and so exclusive, yet built with public dollars, right? How does that make sense? How does that make sense? I'm in awe of it because so many of our communities have facilities that are used such a fraction of the time. So when we think about if it was an educational facility for everyone, what could we begin to imagine? And what resources do we have at our fingertips that we aren't even using right now? So I'll throw that into the mix too.
Okay, so just another question that picks up a couple of questions in the chat, and it's really around navigating cultural differences and what advice, well, firstly, what advice for teachers, but also what does it mean for the training of teachers and the support of teachers? How do we support navigating those different cultures? And similarly, or a separate question that's related is, I guess the question in the chat around what's the benefits here for teachers? What's the benefits in reframing? How does this make teachers' job more sustainable and more positive? But perhaps, Debbie, you might like to start.
Thanks so much, Jason. I mean, I think the benefits are incredible. I think what it means is that we're not working in isolation anymore. That we're not alone in this work. We're not feeling like we have to have all the answers and all of the knowledge, that we have a wealth of resources around us to draw on, so that if I work in community, I might know some things. Tony knows a ton of things I don't know. John knows a ton of things I don't know. So all of a sudden, this resource pool is just so much larger. How do we attend to culture? Again, think about our families. They're all situated in their culture, in their identity, in their language. We don't have to know that. We just have to access it. You know, I mentioned Cooking for Cohesion. It's a strategy, actually, John and Jason, that I picked up in Australia. I saw a school doing this process with their high school kids. They called it Cooking for Cohesion, where they had diverse kids come together and they cooked their food and they sat together, and the food was really just a vehicle for storytelling. And so I've borrowed that idea, and we're doing it with our families. So in our schools that are really diverse, let's say our Syrian families, we provide the money for them to buy the food. They cook for all of us. They cook together, we watch them cook, we taste, we touch, we smell, and then we all sit on the gym floor together and we share that meal. And as we do that, they tell us who they are, where they come from, what their experiences have been, their hopes and dreams for their children, the challenges they've been facing in Canada. And all of a sudden, strangers are now friends. Bassam, one father at the end of a meal like that, he looked out at the crowd in the school gym and he said, "We've shared a meal. You're now my family." People were in tears, right? And then, it was Bangladeshi families, and then it was Eritrean families, et cetera, et cetera. Like the expertise is there. We don't have to own it. We just have to open our doors to it. That's how I see this work. The best people to teach culture and diversity are those people who live it every single day. And I just have to be open-minded and welcoming.
Debbie, that was really beautiful. I wanted to share a couple of anecdotes that I think will build on your good point. One is that we have to figure out if our value is that schools are places that sort and are looking for success for some, or our goal is success for all, and success defined by children and families, not by state or province tests. And that means that they're well prepared for their future, but they're also caring, loving, and really good people. I had the privilege of being part of 2 book projects in the last 3 years around understanding principal and teacher experiences working with refugee children from around the world, many countries represented that OECD has on this call, and I know that you work with in your major projects around the world. But the diaspora of young people, there's at least 30 million children right now living in a tent or living in a war zone or have been moved to a place that is not a permanent home. As they get resettled in other places, the successful schools integrate, just as Debbie said, the cultural values, but they don't rush to try to cover curriculum. They build community with families centered in those schools. They spend the first 2 or 3 weeks of the year just building a family in a year 2 classroom or a year 9 classroom. And eventually they get to the curriculum, they don't have the learning loss, and they have the whole family support. They built in the adult education, they get people their housing and their bedding and their other things they need if they've just come from another place. But the chaos on planet Earth right now is extraordinary, and young people are the victims. But schools are a place then, if it's about love and caring and building, not assessing and labeling and sorting, then all of a sudden the transcendence of resilience and the amazing potential of each child comes through. We get their mom some adult education, so she might get a job, and the whole thing changes right away. So the best schools in the world are places that worry less about what they're covering and more about that their children are loved and the families are included, and they're able to get the curriculum done because they built such a great culture. And I have all the evidence in a couple of books if people want to reach out. We've talked to people all around the world. It's extraordinary what's happening.
Many thanks. I want this to carry on. Please, everybody, stay with us for another hour. But I think this discussion is a really excellent illustration of the value of thinking in a structured way around a possible set of what ifs. How can we change? And you bring the different ideas when we're already getting ideas that people have contributed via the chat. We are going to be working with countries in the course of the next year and a half, looking at their own national research bases, looking for practices and experiences they have there of how to better connect teachers with their communities. I mean, things that are shining through are the possibility in reframing the role of teachers and as researchers and innovators. And then I think from Debbie, your final words on being the general point of being open, the openness to expertise, whether it's particularly from families, as you were saying, in the communities. But I think in general, this is the idea, and it goes back to the professional identity and the relational parts that we were talking about earlier on. So much has come here through this discussion with you. Thank you for your time. You can read much more about this, everybody, in Jason McGrath's paper, which will be available on our website tomorrow, and it will give you an idea on the research base that's there now and the full structure of these ambition loops as they look now. Thank you everybody for your time. Thank you to our colleagues in the communications team here who've supported this beautifully, and to Jason for leading the way. I look forward to continuing our discussions and learning. Keep connecting, everybody.